What's up, you guys? My name is Aubrey, this is my channel, and today we're going to be talking about a way in which you could go about doubling your income almost instantly. You see, there are millions of people all over the world that have managed to somehow juggle two remote corporate jobs. They're juggling two salaries, two 401ks, but they're also juggling two 40-hour work weeks, two companies, and two sets of bosses. So in this video, I'm going to be breaking down exactly how this works. I'm going to be giving you my take on this entire scenario and whether or not it's actually worth it, and I'm going to be talking about how you could do this exact same thing if you're interested in doing it. So let's get started. Now, over the last couple of weeks, there's been a number of different news articles published online talking about the idea of people, mainly millennials, who are working two different corporate jobs, and thus they're getting paid two salaries. Now, these articles were published by news outlets like Forbes as well as the Wall Street Journal, but it seems as though the entire idea of working two corporate jobs really came from a blog called Overemployed. You see, this blog was written from the perspective of somebody that did this exact same thing, and now they are not only documenting their journey of doing it, but they're also giving advice to others that want to do this as well. Now, Overemployed is what inspired this video, and they have a lot of information on their blog talking about this, giving tips, tricks, and advice. So if you guys are interested in the idea of working two corporate jobs, I highly encourage you to check out this blog. I will include a link down in the description below that you can check out. But now begs the question of what exactly does it mean to work two corporate jobs? Well, it's exactly what it sounds. You're juggling two different jobs. Now, the funny thing is that it actually isn't uncommon at all for people to work two jobs. In fact, I would argue it is very common depending on the industry that you work in. For example, low-paying hourly jobs, oftentimes people will get two of them in order to make ends meet. Teachers sometimes will also have to take two jobs because teachers are relatively low paid. The big difference, though, is that whenever these types of people that are a teacher, people that work shift work, whenever these types of workers get a second job, it's oftentimes in their free time, not when they're supposed to be working that first job. For example, if you're a teacher and you have two jobs, oftentimes you will work at the school Monday through Friday, and then you may work at a restaurant during the weekend, or you may lifeguard, or you may do a side gig during the weekend when you're not at school. You would never be able to pull off working at two different schools at the exact same time. But that's where remote work has really opened the floodgates into a ton of new opportunities, including the potential of juggling two corporate jobs at once. You see, the world of remote work has really opened up opportunities for people that want to do this type of thing. And in fact, millions of people are taking advantage of it. Millions of people all over the world have decided that they want to work two different corporate jobs. And as a result, they're doing just that. They're working two corporate jobs, they're getting paid two salaries, they have two 401ks, they have two bosses, and they're able to pull this off, and as a result, they are making a ton of money. In some cases, some of these people are making between $400,000 and $600,000 per year because they are juggling two different salaries, and as a result, they're making twice as much money. But now that we know what working two corporate jobs is and what it could look like, now begs the questions of what are some of the things that you need to be aware of, and how could you go about doing this yourself if you really wanted to. But before we dig into those topics, I would ask you guys to do me a huge favor and please hit the like button for the YouTube algorithm as well as subscribe to this channel. It really helps me out, it helps this channel grow, and if you could do that, I would be so appreciative. So with that out of the way, let's now dig into some of these red flags and some of these things that you need to be aware of. Now, one of the first kind of alarms that may be ringing into your head about this concept of working two corporate jobs is the legality behind it. Is it legal or is it illegal to work two corporate jobs? And according to Overemployed themselves, it actually isn't illegal. You have your full right to be able to work two corporate jobs at once. But the big fuzzy line comes into play when it comes to your employee contract and what you've signed whenever you agree to work for a specific company. For example, you almost certainly would not be able to work for Apple and Samsung at the same time, or Nike and Adidas at the same time, or Uber and Lyft at the same time. You would have to choose two companies that are not competing with one another in order to avoid any legal issues. But as long as you look into your employee contract and you see what your employee contract allows and disallows for you to do, then you could absolutely be within your legal right to work two corporate jobs and thus get two salaries. Another thing to be aware of is the organizational and the logistical side of working two corporate jobs. I mentioned this a bit earlier, but I want to expand on it now. The thing about working two jobs and the entire idea of having two jobs isn't something that's anything new. It's been around forever. But the difference is that whenever we think of somebody that has two jobs, we think of somebody that works one one job in the morning and then another in the evening. We never think about a person working 2 jobs at the exact same time within the same amount of hours. And if you're somebody who's doing that, then logistically it can be a bit tricky because there are different things that you need to be doing for each job at the exact same time. And that's where juggling things like Zoom meetings, things like phone calls, things like calendars, all of these things can become really, really tricky if you're somebody who's doing it for 2 separate companies. So being organized and being the type of person that can stay organized is something that is incredibly important if you're wanting to do this type of thing successfully. And the last red flag and the last hurdle that I want to talk about before we dig into what exactly you need to do to go about doing this yourself is your LinkedIn profile. Now, this is something that is explicitly mentioned on Overemployed, and I think that it is such an important note that I want to talk about it here. Now, this is something that I would have never thought about unless Overemployed mentioned it, but the reality is so many of us have LinkedIn profiles. And the thing about LinkedIn is that it is associated with the company or the job that you're doing. So what do you do if you're somebody that is working for 2 different companies and neither one of those companies know that you're working for the other company? How do you manage that with your LinkedIn? Well, to be honest, I don't really know the answer to that question. I think that it's very, very tricky. Maybe you would just delete your LinkedIn altogether. Maybe you would have your LinkedIn be very generic. Maybe you just simply wouldn't update your LinkedIn so it would be outdated. I think there are a wide variety of different ways that you can go about approaching this, but dealing with your LinkedIn profile is something that would absolutely need to be addressed if you're somebody who's wanting to work 2 jobs. So now that we know some of the hurdles and some of the red flags that you should be aware of, let's now talk about what you should do or what you can do if you're somebody that applicably wants to do this exact same thing. Now, I'm going to be honest with you. I'm really into this idea. I really like the idea of working 2 corporate jobs and thus collecting 2 salaries. And really, it comes down to one simple belief system. I'm a firm believer that people in their 20s and early 30s, it's your time to work as hard as possible and to make as much money as you possibly can. That way you can invest that money into your future so that once you're in your 30s and 40s and 50s, you don't have to work quite as hard. You can kind of coast from then on out. And so because of that, I think that if you're somebody who is in your 20s and you're not married or you don't have kids, I think that this is like a great situation to take advantage of. Use remote work from home and really, really work hard for even a year or 2 years and make a ton of money by working 2 remote jobs. But I do think there are some things that you should do so that you can execute this properly. Number 1 is to get 2 computers. Now, this is something that I view as an absolute must. You must do this if you want to execute on this properly. And the reason is simple. It's to stay organized with the workload of 2 different companies in 2 different positions. With 2 different computers, you can ensure that files and documents aren't commingling with one another and thus they're not getting misplaced. You can manage calendars more efficiently. You can manage Zoom meetings more efficiently. Everything can get done more efficiently if there's 2 separate computers for each different company that you're working for. Yeah, you have to buy the computer unless the company provides you with one, but that is a small price to pay for a much more efficient workload. Number 2 is to live and die by your calendar. Now, all of us are probably glued to our calendars on a week-by-week basis. I know that I rely on mine very, very heavily. But the reality is if you have 2 different workloads, 2 different sets of meetings, 2 different bosses to listen to, your calendar is going to get very overwhelming very, very quickly. And so if you're somebody who's wanting to have 2 corporate jobs, being really regimented with the maintenance and the upkeep of your calendar is an absolute must if you're wanting to do this properly. So you should absolutely make sure that you block off times if you're not able to work. Block off times in your calendars where you're required to be at a meeting for the other job. Make sure to have time in the calendar for any time that you're not available for calls or meetings. Make sure that your calendar stays up to date 24/7, because if you don't rely on your calendar as a tool to help keep yourself organized, then you will get flustered very, very easily because you're managing 2 different sets of work, and that is something that can get very confusing unless you have an organizational tool like your calendar. The next one is to keep this information on the down low. Now, this is something that I think is very important because the reality is, even though this isn't technically illegal, it is definitely frowned upon and it definitely isn't the norm or the standard. And so broadcasting the idea that you have 2 corporate jobs, 2 white-collar jobs to everybody that you know simply isn't a good idea. Of course, tell your spouse, tell your family, and tell your close friends. But as far as telling your colleagues or your acquaintances, I would probably just keep it to yourself. And on that same note of lying low, it's also important to lie low at the actual job itself. Now, if you're the personality type to take on 2 different corporate jobs, chances are you're probably a hard worker and you're probably an overachiever. So you're probably the type of person to go above and beyond in a corporate world. But it's important to really put yourself in check here, because if you're somebody who is working 2 jobs, it's very important to lie low and to really be discreet with yourself and the quality of work that you do. Make sure to keep your head down to work and to not draw attention to yourself, because the more attention that you draw to yourself, the bigger of a chance that there will be that that somebody will catch on to what you're doing. Now, ultimately, I really love this hustle, and I think that it's a really great opportunity for a very specific type of person, but the reality is it definitely isn't for everybody. The fact is, not everybody has the ability or has the desire to work 80 hours per week and to juggle 2 corporate jobs. For example, if you're somebody that is wanting to grow in the corporate world and you eventually want to become a VP or a president or a C-level executive, this probably isn't a good idea for you. The reason is that your career is definitely a long-term game plan. You're not necessarily worried about what's going to happen tomorrow or how much money you're going to make next year. Instead, you're worrying about what's going to happen 10, 20, 30 years down the line. And the reality is, working 2 jobs and having that reputation of being somebody that worked for 2 different companies at once isn't a reputation that companies will love. It definitely could potentially put a negative shadow on you as an employee. And so if you're somebody that wants to play the long-term game in corporate America, this probably isn't the best route. But alternatively, I think the type of person that this hustle fits perfectly is the entrepreneurial-minded person who is using corporate America as a tool to eventually get into self-employment. For example, maybe you're working in corporate America to eventually be able to open your own business, or eventually be able to buy real estate, or eventually be able to invest in a specific type of company. If this type of person describes you, then I think dedicating a year or 2 years of your time to juggling 2 corporate jobs could be an excellent path to pursue. You can double your income, you can raise capital for whatever venture you want to pursue, and yeah, you'll have a tough 2 years of working a ton, but it will ultimately all be worth it because it will allow for you to quit your job and pursue your own ventures. If I worked in corporate America, this is absolutely something that I would pursue, and I think that there's a lot of opportunity for this if you're a specific type of person that could really do well with this type of workload. But like always, you guys, I wanted to make this video because I think that this is so interesting. I think that there's a lot of opportunity here. And if you're somebody who is wanting to work 2 jobs, then I think that this is a really cool and really unique path to pursue that quite honestly, I have never thought of in the past. Now, before we sign off, I would like to note that I have a brand new course that has just launched for pre-sale today. It is the Content Creators Masterclass, and it is on pre-sale for the entire month of September, meaning you can get it for 50% off all month long. It launches on October 1st, and at that time, it will go back to its full price of $150. Now, this is a course that I created outlining my entire process of how I've turned YouTube into my full-time job. You see, I have a relatively small channel. 70,000 subscribers is not a ton, but with these 70,000 subscribers, I have been able to use this as my main source of income. And I teach you guys how you can do this exact same thing in this course. So if you're interested in checking it out, I will have a link down in the description below that you can check out. I will also have a link down in the comments section as well if you're interested in checking it out and buying the course. But like always, you guys, if you have any questions, comments, if you have anything to add, I would love to hear it. So make sure to leave a comment down below. And while you guys are at it, make sure to hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, and hit the notification bell. And I will see you guys in the next video.